Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, rather. Welcome. We're going to give it a moment before we get started. If you want to go ahead and put in the chat box where you're from and what do you hope to learn, that would be great. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on whatever part of the country that you're in. I know we have some West Coast folks here, and I know Kathy Tan is on the West Coast, so she is still in morning, and we are in the afternoon here in the Midwest. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our session today. Just giving it a moment for folks to hop on. Go ahead and put in the chat box where you are from and what do you hope to learn today. And if you can hear me okay, just let me know. You can hear me okay. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm so excited that you have chosen to join us this morning or this afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Dr. Anise Fisher. I am the founder and CEO of Developing Capacity Coaching, and we are very excited to talk to you today about part 2 of our Leading for Anti-Racism and Equity workshop on how do you begin the healing and reconciliation pathway. With me today, I have Kathy Tan, who is our partner and project lead for Developing Capacity Coaching. Kathy will also come on a little bit later to serve as a moderator for the Q&A. So as we progress through the session, feel free to write down your questions and we will be sure to answer them. The second person I wanted to introduce is Beverly Harris. Beverly is a seasoned discrimination and harassment investigator, as well as someone who has an extensive amount of experience in building organizational culture and also working with healing and reconciliation within organizations and conflict management, both internal to teams as well as investigating on a local and a regional level. And Beverly will come back on and join us a little bit later with some tips from her experience. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our session today. I have enabled closed captioning already via the video, but you are welcome to enable closed caption as well via Zoom, but you will also see it at the bottom of my screen from PowerPoint. Before we begin all of our sessions, we always like to start with the land and labor acknowledgement to acknowledge the lands that we are standing on, but also to honor the labor. The lands that I am standing on in Chicago are represented there. And we do this as an act of solidarity with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, saying that we support the cause of restoration of land and restoration of wealth and restoration of community that has been lost through the process of colonization. We also share labor acknowledgement to acknowledge our enslaved brothers and sisters who built the foundation and the fabric of this country, whose names that we will never know, but who we believe deserve a rightful honoring for the sacrifice that they did not choose to make in order to build what we call the United States. And finally, we like to just take some time to center our souls and bring everybody into the space. We realize that some of you ran from another meeting or maybe clicked on from another meeting. And so there could be a variety of things going through your head right now. And so we want to take a moment just to do a few deep breaths to bring your mind, your body, and your spirit into the space. So you can feel free to close your eyes and I will guide you through 3 deep breaths. Want to go ahead and take a deep breath in. You know you're taking a deep breath because your stomach will expand a little bit. So let's go in. Release. Feel the air flow through your shoulders and flow through the rest of your body. Let's take a deep breath in. Release. And now in this last breath, I want to encourage you to feel the breath flow through your teeth as we exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Okay. Thank you for taking just a few moments to come into the space. So here are our outcomes today. We're going to talk to you about how to effectively address racial incidents. Last session, we talked about how to address it at the time of the incident, so when it first happens. And this session is going to be focused on the pathway to healing and reconciliation. I will do a brief recap of what we did last session, but please, you want to check out the video that we have shared, and we'll drop the link as well in here. It's on our YouTube page to watch the first video. The second thing is we're going to walk you through all 6 steps of our Act Now framework. And then based on that, we hope that you will be able to make a plan to think about what are some of the items from this webinar that you would want to use in your practice. So before we get started, we always like to share just a base overview of who we are as an organization if you don't know us. Developing Capacity exists in the world to coach people to trust themselves, to lead for equity and justice at work, at home, and in their families. But most importantly, we're coaching people to effectively lead for equity and justice. Whenever you come into contact with us, you're going to experience our 3 friends here. You're going to experience a level of capacity building, which means we're going to give you some real tangible tools that you can use in practice. You're going to walk away with skills. That's going to be the Act Now framework. You're going to feel like you've been coached, which means you're going to feel Beverly and myself, and even Kathy when she comes on to moderate, to help you to see that you can rise to be that effective leader for equity no matter what level you sit at within the organization. You're going to feel the coach in us. And then the third thing is you're going to experience what we call data-informed decision making, which is we're going to give you a strategy, the Act Now framework, on how do you collect information to be much more intentional when you lead for equity. So data-informed is not just about having a climate assessment in front of you. It's about collecting information in a very protocol-driven way to be able to make specific actions that move the needle for equity and justice. And finally, we always plant blueprints. That means you're going to walk away with something that's A plus B plus C, and that will be our Act Now framework. And everything is based on our core values of equity, love, healing, and justice. One of the things that Beverly and I talked about when we were shaping this session is that what we are offering to you today is a defiance of the normal response for how does one respond to racial incidents that happen in public. We know that we're going to be pushing some people to the edge of their comfort zones because what we are recommending is not what people normally do, because our focus is on healing and reconciliation. Our focus is on helping everyone to understand that they have the authority, they have power and choice to act with urgency in order to create an environment that honors our collective humanity. We started sharing the framework a couple of weeks ago, and it's Act Now. The ACT part of the framework that we shared a couple of weeks ago focused on what do you do when the incident first happens? And that's acknowledge what happened, consult with those involved, and take action to do the real work. And what we also did was to paint a context for what this looks like, because based on where you sit in your organizational chart, you can address this challenge in a variety of different ways. But the way we chose to look at it was you're in a staff meeting. Bob makes a comment to Janet. He calls her angry and aggressive because at the all staff meeting, she has raised concerns because the organization has decided to cancel Juneteenth events and events focused on our LGBTQ awareness because stakeholders and collaborators think that those events are divisive. If you've ever seen this happen in your organization or heard of it, let me know in the chat box where there was a desire to advance equity and inclusion, have these events, and then because some people thought they were divisive, they were shut down. So Janet has raised her concerns in the meeting saying this is problematic. If we say that we represent equity and justice, why are we canceling these events? And in the event, when we think about the first part of this framework, which is the act, we want you to first acknowledge what happened. And so what we talked about is that you have to speak truth to power and name the form of racism or microaggression that happened in the meeting. Addressing Janet, a Black woman, with the terms aggressive, angry, we know the terms that people often use when a Black woman is being passionate about what she's saying, is a microaggression, is a racial microaggression. So we need to name the form of what it is and also be honest about what happened and how it occurred. So the example we gave is that we're positioning ourselves as the manager of this team. And in that case, this person would send an email and convene a follow-up conversation in which they would talk about the racial microaggression that occurred. This is what happened in the meeting, and this is how the harm occurred. The next thing that we talked about is the importance of consulting with all those that are involved. And there are a couple of different parties here. You have the person that is the survivor, Janet, the person who has experienced this racial harm, this attack on her character in front of the entire team. What we offer in the framework is, one, when you are working with the survivor, one is encourage them to believe themselves that this did happen and what happened was wrong, to provide a space for them to acknowledge their power and to choose their own path, which means Janet may not want to have a reconciliation meeting with Bob right now in the moment, but she gets to choose her path. If you need to take some time off, if you want to pursue some resources from our employee engagement group, you want to provide multiple options for the survivor to choose their path. For the perpetrator, and I'm using that term intentionally, the big thing is to be honest with acknowledging what you did. All of us at some point in time have been a perpetrator. We don't like to be confronted on those actions, but we cannot begin a healing and reconciliation process that is rooted in denial and rooted in someone not taking ownership for their responsibility. The next thing is for that person to repent and make amends. Repent just simply means that you turn around and you choose not to do that again. Now, what Beverly and I talked about last time is that it's not up for you to argue back and forth with this person to try to prove them wrong. Beverly talked a lot about within organizations, there should be a bias reporting process, and that's for the human resources person to investigate this. That is not your job. But as the person that is managing the team, or even a team member who watches this, because you still have power and choice, you possess the ability to say, hey, Bob, here's what I witnessed you do. It doesn't seem like you to make this type of attack. This was a microaggression. What are your plans to, one, heal yourself, but to two, to make amends with Janet, because she was visibly upset and frustrated, and that impacted our entire team. So again, even if you're not the manager, you still possess the ability to follow up with Janet to check in to see how she's doing. And the third thing we discuss is that people often don't address the community impact, which is the residual harm. Someone is in an environment, a racist comment has been made, or in this instance, a racial microaggression has been done towards Janet, and no one checks in with the rest of the team. No one checks in with anybody else to see how they're doing. Are there any other Black women or Black identified folks that might be experiencing residual harm as a result of witnessing this, or they may have experienced this themselves? So we do have to follow up with the community and offer support and share the next steps. That means that you should be at your next team meeting talking about what's happening, creating a space for healing and open dialogue. And if you are not the person that is equipped to do that, then work with someone else in your organization that's a trusted, objective colleague to be able to engage in that conversation. But you will notice this when we go into depth with the now part of the framework. You're always going to be thinking about these three entities when you're addressing racial healing. And the last thing we talked about is to begin to take action and do the real work. And we talked about this from three different standpoints. One is a boundary has to be set in the organization that we are a community that honors all humanity, and this behavior is not tolerated. That needs to be spoken from the words of whoever the organized leader is or leaders of that organization, but also it needs to be reiterated via norms and other strategies that this behavior is not tolerated. We do not call colleagues angry or aggressive. It doesn't matter if it's a Black woman or an orange woman. If you call somebody those words, period, it's not saying I value you and your humanity or that I want to be in community with you. There's other ways for you to question or to engage in healthy conflict without using those words. But when you use those words with a Black woman, there are racial undertones and racial implications that we must address. The second thing is from a bystander. And we talked about the importance of informing the team that there's expectations for you to intervene. And Beverly talked a little bit about this, that, you know, the place where she works, they sent a notification out to all of the team members saying, if you witness bias, you have a responsibility to intervene or report it to human resources when you see racism, sexism, homophobia happening in the organization. That's a clear-cut boundary that's being set, that we are not an environment that tolerates that. The second thing is to see it, name it, check in, report it. Again, if you feel uncomfortable about directly intervening, then you can still check in with those parties, but you can also report it to your supervisor or you can report it to human resources, even if it's not you. And then the third thing that we talked about, which I'm going to go in depth with now, is how do you build pathways for healing and reconciliation? So you are bringing your community on a journey with you. And part of that is identifying what are the next steps for healing our internal community. How do you reaffirm the core values of the organization? That this is a place where everyone is valued, heard, seen, and respected, regardless of their race, class, gender, or national origin, sexual orientation, and so forth. And you have to have a willingness to continue the conversation. Again, we will drop the link to the webinar that we did that takes this more in depth. So I really encourage you to listen to it. I went through this very quickly just so that you can have context to be in today's webinar, but please check out the previous webinar, which will give you greater context. So now we're going to move into the now part of this. And the context is still the same. Let me go back here. And now I'm going to focus in on navigating the healing pathway. Open the door for reconciliation, because healing and reconciliation are two different things. And how do you work until inclusion and belonging becomes the norm? Now, as I shared this context, Bob has said to Janet, a Black woman in a very public space, and we've all seen this happen in a very public space. It's called her aggressive, has called her angry, because she has raised concerns about the organization canceling Juneteenth events because some stakeholders felt that they were not collaborative, that they were divisive. When you begin the healing process, healing is happening over a variety of different spheres of the organization. Healing is the process of trying to address the harm that has been caused and repair the harm that has been inflicted upon people, with the goal of opening the door towards reconciliation. Reconciliation means the restoration of friendly relations. The first part of this I want you to think about is healing has to be done from a person who perpetuated the harm, and also from the survivor's perspective and the community perspective. As the person who perpetuated the harm, healing begins to happen for that person when they accept that they actually did the act. And the reason why we actually talk about this pathway, because many people don't want to talk about the person who committed the harm, or folks want to throw them out and think that they're irredeemable. We don't believe that. We believe we have to lead everyone on the journey. And when I say accept that, I mean that you accept that you had a fall in your humanity. Accept that you showed up in a way that was not okay and it harmed somebody else. But that doesn't mean that you are frozen in that way. And we say accept because part of what happens is people who often perpetuate these racial microaggressions or homophobic microaggressions is they don't want to accept that they did it. And because they stay in the denial phase, it becomes very hard for us to engage in conversation. So it's an acceptance that I did this, that I fell short of the mark in this moment. And then you have to be willing to make amends. And here, as the manager, as the colleague of this person, you know, if you witness somebody doing this, if you're the manager, the conversation should be, okay, Bob, how do you plan to make amends with Janet? And then as the perpetrator, you have to forgive yourself for falling short. And this is why we say release shame and guilt, because what happens is when we do something that is embarrassing or that we realize shows us in an unfavorable light, or we commit a racist act, we get stuck in the guilt and the shame, and then we don't come out of it. We're embarrassed. And so part of it is you have to be able to forgive yourself to say, hey, I fell short. This is not who I want to be in the world. And this is an opportunity for me to rise up to be a person that cares about other folks' humanity. When we begin to think about the survivor and the community, this orange tab, we want to be thinking about from a survivor lens, how can we help them release the trauma that they just experienced? And that healing requires also accepting that my colleague just called me angry and aggressive in front of everybody. This person just embarrassed me and attacked my character. So it's accepting that it happened to you, but it is not you, that you are not that person. But sometimes I know as a Black woman, when I'm harmed, I'm in shock. Like, I don't want to believe this just happened to me. I wake up the next day and I'm just like, did this really happen? But part of me moving on to heal is to accept that this is a chapter in my story, but it's not my whole book. And then honoring their right to heal. And this is where we really support our survivors, with honoring their right to heal. Their healing might be, I need a couple of days off work. I need support with, you know, therapeutic resources. You know, I need support. I might not want to come to the next staff meeting because I feel like I don't want to be, you know, have all eyes on me. But allow that person the right to choose their healing path. And please don't make them go into an immediate reconciliation conversation, because that person may have been subjected to continual trauma and they may not want to sit across the room from the person that just harmed them the very next day. So that doesn't mean you don't do reconciliation conversations, but you provide an opportunity to have it to be paced. And you could still have the global conversation with the team. You can still set norms about how do we honor our humanity. You can still do all of that, even if that person is not ready to sit down. And part of the process of choosing freedom is that there has to be some change happening. And part of that is reminding the perpetrator that they are not the victim in this case. And this is borrowed from some of the work I learned from studying the conflict in Israel and Palestine. Is sometimes people, you know, when they're perpetrated harm, they take the victim stance so that they don't have to be held accountable for their actions. But we need to be honest with people that you are not the victim here, Bob. You inflicted harm upon Janet, and we can't distort that, because that's not speaking the truth. But what we can do is support you along with Janet on how to come back to a place where you can show up in the fullness of who you were created to be, which is someone that does not harm people. And we begin to also to support Janet as a survivor. And you can use that language as survivor. And some people on this may be thinking, well, why are you using that such strong language for someone who just got called aggressive and angry? The reason why I'm using that is because anybody that is subjected to a microaggression, it is a violent act. It is a harmful act. And one, you don't know how many times they've experienced that from other people, but one time is one time too many. And so we begin to encourage Janet to embrace being a survivor. What does it look like for her to feel comfortable, for her to feel heard, seen, and respected at work? And what can I do to support that? And as a community, the community has to begin to think about, how are we going to be active agents for equity? How are we going to begin to behave when we see something, say something? The next is begin to open the door for reconciliation. Again, this is the process of trying to restore friendly relations. This process is a process of co-creation. It's a multi-pronged plan. First, from organizational leaders' lens, you have some responsibility to shape and support the shaping of a community that honors people's humanity. And that means you should use public spaces like your staff meetings or one-on-one times so that people can process what's going on. There's also some restoration to happen with the perpetrator and survivor, which is a private mediated session. And then as a community, what are we going to do as a community to ensure that we're creating the conditions for people to have their humanity honored? That, you know, if someone says Janet is angry and aggressive, again, hopefully not, but again, that Ronnie would stand up and say, you know what, Bob, that's way out of line. That's a microaggression. All she did was ask, why did we change the schedule? Can we make sure that we treat everybody with, you know, fairness, and that we honor people's humanity? The second piece here, we talk about the process of making amends. And I've said this already, the perpetrator needs to make amends, and organizational leaders have to be willing to make amends. If you fumble the ball, if you drop the ball, okay, if you just send the, as CG talked about last time we met, the racial solidarity email with no action steps, you fumbled as an organization, and you too need to speak up and say, we didn't properly handle this, but here's our way that we're trying to handle it the correct way. And if the organization does not have norms or do not have ground rules for how to honor people's humanity, and if they're not posted in your organization, either in the actual office space or has been sent to people via email, then you are creating the conditions for these things to happen in your organization. And then how is the community going to commit to honoring one another? And here's some examples of how you can mutually create a community that honors people's humanity. Establish and use norms. What are the norms for how we treat each other and interact with one another? Our next 2 webinar sessions are going to be on how do you create an inclusive community? And we're going to talk to you about how do you set norms for inclusive communities in your organizations. It's something we realize as a result of doing this webinar that needs to happen. The next thing is post tools for disrupting racism and other isms. Your organization should post information either in the physical location or email them out. Here's how you disrupt bias. Here's a process for reporting. And it's not just enough to just post them or email them. You have to actually follow them. And that's not just something that your manager can do. Anybody on this call, no matter where you sit in the organization, can send an email out, can send a podcast out, can send a tool. You can send out this webinar. You can send out information on how you disrupt racism. And also you can contact your human resources on how do you how do you report bias? So again, you don't have to wait for your supervisor to do this. And the last thing I'll say is that you have to work until inclusion and belonging becomes the norm. So you have to give time for healing and reconciliation to occur. I've been saying this over and over again. This isn't the incident happened Monday, everything is fixed on Friday. No, it's probably going to take some time, going to take a couple of weeks, a couple of months. And you have to monitor for change behavior. And you're not just monitoring Bob to make sure that he's changed. You're actually monitoring the team and the community to ensure that people are honoring the humanity, that we are living our norms. I always encourage people to put your norms at the end of your agendas. As a team in DCC, we reflect on our values, our core values, at the end of every week to see whether or not we live these and what do we need to do to make shifts to live them in our practice, but also with our partners. And the last thing is you have to have some concrete plans for inclusion and belonging. Those could be climate assessments that you do in the organization. Take the climate assessment and actually do something with the data. ongoing feedback loops at the meetings or in your one-on-ones. What's going well with honoring our collective humanity? What do we need to work on? Do you feel heard, seen, and respected? And ask that of people across a variety of identities, especially our marginalized communities. And then ultimately, you need a robust plan for how you're going to transform your people, your policies, and your processes so that equity and inclusion is built into it. Celebrate equity wins. You know, when things are going well, celebrate that. But also honor cultural traditions, and not in a performative way, meaning this is not asking Black people to be on your website during Black History Month or changing your logo to LGBT flag colors, but then you don't have policies and processes that actually support our LGBTQI plus folks. That's performative. We're not saying be performative. Don't change your flag to Juneteenth colors if Black people are being discriminated against in your organization and you are not doing anything about it, because that's actually a dishonoring of people's cultural traditions. So if you're going to do it, go all the way and honor it in a way where, yes, we can have these changing of logos, but I'm going to make sure that my people behave that way in my organization, my policies are fair and inclusive, and our processes are fair and inclusive. I know I just gave y'all a lot. You're probably going to have to hit the replay on this, but you can see this is something we're really passionate about. I'm going to turn it over to Beverly, and she's going to give a few tips from her perspective, and then we will go into our Q&A moderated by Kathy.
Thank you, Dr. Fisher, and good afternoon, everyone. And as we get to the point where we're activating and we're moving into the now, it is going to be a lot of information and a lot of data, and you have to be able to collect and assess that data to determine where the gaps are and how to change these systemic things that are happening in the organization. You must be ready to communicate. You can't do surveys and climate assessments and interviews and investigations and don't communicate that out to staff. Then that is going to lead to them not believing that you're invested in this and that you're trying to make a change. And you have to move with a sense of urgency. It cannot be something that you start and then you just wait for those significant times of the year like Juneteenth or Black History Month to do anything. You have to make people believe that this is urgent to you, this is important to you, and you're going to intentionally move in a direction to make it a norm that these things don't exist in your organization. And I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Okay, yes, hello everyone. So now we're going to hop into our question and answer. We did get a few questions that came up as you all registered. However, if you have a question that, you know, just as Dr. Fisher and Beverly were sharing with us, please feel free to drop it in the chat. And if there's time, we will definitely circle back. So our first question is how can we make other racial groups get out of the stereotype fed to them by media, sometimes against their own? And Dr. Fisher or Beverly, either one of you who would like to start?
I'll let you start, Beverly, and then I'll hop in.
Hey, repeat that question one more time.
Yes, what recommendations, how can we make other racial groups get out of the stereotypes fed to them by the media, sometimes against their own?
I feel like when it's one of those things of when you're dealing with people, you need to deal with them on an individual basis and not allow what you hear in the media or what you suspect to form opinions about individuals and approach people that way. Approach people, find something that you have in common with the individual and approach them in a way where you're dealing with them based on your experience with them, not based on what someone is saying.
Yeah. I concur. I think the second thing is, you know, we have all lived in a culture where we have been fed images. We've been socialized to believe that Black people are this way, Asian folks are this way, our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters are this way. And so sometimes we believe that. we believe those socializations. Even myself as a Black woman can believe those things. Internalized racism, right, is what we call it. So we all have to go through a process of unlearning. The first thing I like to say to folks, when you hear people saying things that one might be internalized racism or they might be perpetuating stereotypes, is to see something, say something, to say to the person like, hey, Beverly, I heard you make this comment about Black women. Like, I know you're a Black woman. You know, I'm using it as same race because that's what the question was. You know, I know you're a Black woman, but that's a stereotype and it's biased against Black women. I always hear you talking about that we need to be supportive of Black women. This comment does not support it. Can we talk about this? Because it seems to be different from what your values are. You see how I approach Beverly? I didn't say, Beverly, how dare you talk about Black women like that? No one comes over to behaving in ways that honor people's humanity when you attack them, when you try to shame them. So there's a way for us to be open and honest and share what a stereotype is and the impact of it, but you invite people to the table.
Thank you both for sharing. So, and I'm hearing it's based from love. And what I was hearing from Beverly is that it's really about building relationships, like building relationships with folks instead of feeding into these, you know, media and stereotypes. And then, yeah, bringing it back to that Act Now framework. So our second question, so given the recent Supreme Court decision to eliminate affirmative action in college admissions, what recommendations do either of you have in order to get diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging to thrive? Yeah, either of you can start.
Well, I work for a university, and when this was coming about, the university was in the front of letting us know where they stood, that they didn't support it. And based on once the announcement came out, they immediately, the president of the university immediately came out with a response, and they had been working on this, how they were going to not let this change the trajectory they're on to admit people based on their credentials and allow access to this university to everyone. So I was very proud of that, to know that the university wasn't going to just simply say, okay, well, we don't have to do this anymore. And so knowing that a lot of universities are going to continue to move toward opening their doors to people that would not normally be able to have access. I was comforted in that, and knowing that, and they have a whole plan of what they plan to do and how they plan to do it. And so I feel like that gave me some like, oh, okay, it's not going to just close the door on people like maybe what the intent was.
Right. And Beverly is a perfect example, that organization, of what everyone else should have been doing, right? We knew this was coming down the Supreme Court. We probably knew how it was going to be ruled, and folks should have been getting prepared and ready. But if you did not do that, hope is not lost for you. There is still an option, meaning that there is still an opportunity for people, you all on this call, to sit down with your respective teams to say, okay, this decision has been brought down. What are we going to do within our organization with our power and choice to ensure that people of color feel heard, seen, respected, and still have equitable access into our programs and services? So this is not just about admissions. This is about, if you run a program, I have some people on here that are involved in city governance. Do people have access to your programs and services in your city? I have folks on here that are in the hospital. Do all people, based on their races, race, sexual orientation, do they have access to fully benefit from the services within your healthcare organization? So we don't have to wait for the courts to come and tell us what to do. We can take time to convene our own folks and say, these are the 3 ways that we're going to make sure that people know that they are welcomed here. We're going to send an email. We're going to publicize it on our websites. We're going to make sure that we do a training with all of our frontline team members that answer the phones or answer the emails, so that they have a message that is consistent, that can be sent out and shared with folks on the fact that we are still open, welcome, receiving, and here are our strategies to ensure that people of color still maintain access. So again, there's always power, there's always choice that you can be making on your local level to address this. We're actually in conversations with the university now about supporting them post this decision. So you can reach out and hire consultants who do equity and justice work to support you through this process, to build your team's capacity to ensure that you still maintain open access.
Okay, so many tips. I'm learning so much from both of you, Beverly and Dr. Fisher. Great. So our last question before we close out our webinar today is, how do we gain leadership buy-in? As a new equity leader, what suggestions do you have to gain leadership buy-in?
I'll take that one first, Kathy. And if and we'll take time for maybe 1 to 2 questions. So people feel free to drop them in the chat box or use the Q&A feature, and we'll make sure we get 1 or 2 questions that might have come up. So one of the things I think it's really important when you come on and you're trying to get buy-in for folks is that you should have a vision for what it is you're trying to accomplish. What do you want to accomplish for the sake of equity? Are you trying to advance diversity, which means that you want to improve numbers? You want to grant more access to marginalized groups. Therefore, you should have a number that you're trying to get to. We're trying to go from 10 to 25%, 15 to 35%. Here, that's just for the diversity gain for numbers. If you're trying to advance inclusion, we want to make sure that we have fair and just experiences, no one's being discriminated against. Then you want to be thinking about, that means that we want to provide bias training for everyone in our organization. We want to make sure that we have we want to make sure we have norms around honoring our humanity. We want to make sure that we provide anonymous feedback to make sure that people are being heard, seen, and respected. If you're trying to advance equity, which is looking at your policy and process, okay, we're going to review these HR processes. We're going to review how people are promoted, how people receive tenure. We're going to review these processes for how people move through the organization in order to ensure that they have a fair and just experience. We're going to look at access numbers. We're going to look at completion numbers. We're going to look at retention numbers. We're going to look at advancement numbers. All of those things are specific metrics that you want to change and actual ideas and plans that you have. The last thing I'll say here quickly is that everybody hopefully has a job description. Your job description are the bullets in your organization that where your supervisors have said, here's where I've given you power and control to run with it and do your thing. And in that case, look at those bullet points and see ways in which you can lead change in that organization and create that plan and take it to your leader team. And lastly, know what you need approval on and you don't need approval on. Because some things you can change in those bullet points and you don't have to get approval from the people above, and sometimes you do.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Fisher. Beverly, anything you'd like to add?
The only thing I would add is that sometimes the leaders in the organization are not aware, and you have to make them aware, and you have to make them aware with all of that information, with the data that's showing them and how it impacts the rest of the organization. And those are going to be multiple conversations sometimes. It's gonna be, but so you have to have the courage to continue to push and move forward, but to make them aware so that you can get their buy-in, because they're sometimes they just don't see it from where they sit. They don't see it the way you see it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Data and also impact. And then I also see the comment from Dr. Fisher, courage to continue the work, right? So we actually have a question that came into the chat. So in the organization, we have a lot of performative actions, and yet the issues and microaggressions that are being addressed yet they don't see issues or microaggressions being addressed or reconciled. This person has also noticed a fear of liability, and people are not encouraged to apologize or acknowledge the incident. So how do you all recommend shifting this approach?
I want to turn that over to Beverly as someone who sits in the seat of institutional accountability to answer that question.
So you won't necessarily see that in people's performance evaluations or job descriptions. The way it's addressed is through reporting it and allowing your diversity officers in the offices that handle that to work with the individuals, the department for training and corrective actions. And once something has been made aware to them, then they will investigate it, and then it's up to the manager of that employee to then make sure that they monitor and do the appropriate corrective actions for it. But you have to start with reporting it to the right place. And oftentimes the manager, they may not know how to handle it or know what to do and know how to mediate it. So you need to get that EEOC and diversity office or ombudsman involved to help you work through those things. And then they're going to see trends and patterns, and that's how things are going to move along. And it's not sometimes a fast process, but it will work if you go through those steps.
Thank you, Beverly. I would just underscore, if you feel like you've reported it to your leaders and they have not made any changes, then you should go to Human Resources and file a formal complaint about what's going on, so that it is on record and it is documented that you've been witnessing things happen within your organization. And then after that, if you feel like there's still no recompense, you can send an email to anybody up the chain, you know, first starting with your supervisor, then their supervisor, on up through the president, CEO, whatever the case it may be, to share your concerns if you feel like that you're continuing to get blocked in that way. And I would say, don't do this alone. I would encourage you to gather other partners if you can within your organization that could be supportive of you. One, so that you can share your frustrations and you all can lift each other up, but two, so that you can build a coalition of folks. I'm hopefully that there's other people there that also notice these things, and together as a collective, you can begin to push for change. And the last thing I'll say is, like, we ourselves are the people who can begin to model what appropriate behavior looks like to honor each other's humanity. So I would encourage you to be that bold person to speak out when you're in meetings, or be that bold person at your team meetings to say, hey, can we set some norms on how to honor each other's humanity? I notice we don't have any norms. Or you could be the person that invites people out to the happy hour, and at the happy hour actually talk about how can we be much more humane to one another. So there's other moves that you can make, even if you don't have the formal position or authority, to influence other people's behaviors around you. But I know it gets tiring, it's challenging. And so it's important for you, as we like to say, to have anchors and sanctuaries. Anchors are things that you can do in the moment to pause yourself, just so that you don't, you know, kind of pop a gasket. And one of the things we say is you can pause and you can ask yourself, how do I want to use my power in this situation? An anchor for you may be to walk around the office, or to take a walk and step outside if the weather is not, or if not, walk the staircase if you're able to, or even just kind of move down the hallway if you have a mobility challenge, to move down, you know, to remove yourself from that situation, just to kind of get some clarity and peace in your mind. And then sanctuaries are just things you do every day to renew your spirit. That could be journaling, that could be tea time, that could be prayer, that could be working out. It has nothing to do with the cause of equity and justice, but everything to do to preserve your mind, your body, and your spirit, so that you can stay in this for the long haul. The last thing that I wanted to share as we are closing out here is to invite you to our webinar. We're going to be doing another 2-part series on creating an inclusive community. In August 29th, we're going to talk about how do you set the environment. And then at the end of September, we're going to talk about how do you hold people accountable for creating that inclusive community. So feel free to come along with us. And then lastly, we've been talking a lot about our Conscious People for Equity course, and we're so excited to release that course on Monday. Conscious People for Equity will be a self-paced 3-module course that you will be able to opt into, and you will learn, what does conscious leadership for equity look like in name of practice? How do you lead other people through the change process? And then what is the process for healing and reconciliation? So check your emails. Katarina, my assistant, will be sending that out on Monday, and we are offering a special rate of $250. It's our beta launch rate. The course will never, ever, ever be this cheap again, but we are late with dropping the course, and so we just want to offer it as a gift for as many people as possible to opt in at this very low rate. It's self-paced online, so the code for this beta launch special rate of $250 will be in the email that will have this video, the Final Act Now handout, as well as the recording. You will see the code in there for the beta launch, and you will have until July 31st to take advantage of that special $250 rate. And we always end with a quote by Bell Hooks, who's my shero and, you know, a inspiration for the work we do here. True resistance, and we put into an equity, begins with people confronting pain, whether it's yours or someone else's, and wanting to do something to change it. Our free webinar series is our living that quote in life. Is that for us, we believe whether or not an organization decides to invest in equity and inclusion work, we offer this limited webinar series to build tools and resources so that people and environments can have tools to begin resistance, so that they can have tools to address people's pain, whether it's theirs or someone else. And we're giving folks the tools to actually do something to change it, whether or not your company decides to pay for it. So we're just honored to be able to come on board and have folks like Beverly. Thank you so much, Beverly, for coming and sharing your expertise and partnering with us as a means
Welcome.
for building other people's capacity to lead for equity. And with that, we are done. We always hang back for a few minutes in case people have questions that they didn't want to share on camera. Thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your day.